Today, I'm going to tell you a crazy story, one that actually came through to my colleague through a walk-in. And as you listen, just try to imagine how desperate and how concerned a woman must be to pour her heart out to a complete stranger. Back when my colleague was working at a Chinese language media in Vancouver, she thought she's seen it all. Endless calls from readers, walk-ins with their complaints, the usual community drama. But then came this case. Let's just say it started with cute meet straight out of a romance novel, and it ended up like a courtroom drama. The start of our story today is what you call a textbook 白富美. That's a popular Chinese slang for rich, gorgeous, and stylish woman. Picture this: mid-30s, freshly divorced, but still having looks and curves like she's just stepped off a glossy set of, fashion magazine. She had that vibe. The kind that says, yes, life knocked me down once, but I still brunch like Eva Longoria in silk pajamas. For privacy reasons, we'll call her Miss A. And as with all our show stories, are real. In fact, life is often stranger than fiction, and what you're about to hear actually happened. Flashback to late 2018. Miss A stormed in the newsroom like Lucy Liu on Ally McBeal. Her face was pale and her voice sharp enough to cut through glass. "I just need to know," she growled. "Is there any way I can sue him?" This was the battle cry of a woman who, like she hasn't slept in days, if not weeks, clutching onto her last shred of control. But before we dive deeper into this messy entanglement, let me give you all the details on her character's backstory. A failed marriage, a huge fat divorce settlement, and a one-way ticket to Vancouver's high society. Miss A had once been married to a very wealthy businessman back in China and was living the crushy life of a society wife. Designer bags, dinner parties, the whole 9 yards. But unfortunately, rich men are like catnips to gold diggers, and they never run out of younger, prettier women lining up for a shot. Eventually, one of them made it to the top, to be on top, literally and figuratively. And Miss A was out. But the ex-husband here, however, is not the villain of the story, though he did contribute to it by leaving her with more than enough to live comfortably on for the rest of her life. Miss A left the heartbreak of a divorce behind, packed up her life, and took her daughter to Vancouver's west side. Think crazy rich Asians, but with fewer poolside cocktails and not so great weather. So you have these picturesque mega mansions stacked like trophy cases, luxury cars lounge in driveways. And remember, this is West Van, where houses cost a bit more than a pretty penny. This is the area code with the kind of wealth that sounds unreal with its stories. For example, like the one where a burglar once broke into a random mansion nearby. He didn't even have to bother with the safe. He just popped open a few drawers and walked out with over $500,000 worth of antique watches and jewelry. Just a cool $500,000 sitting around like pocket change. And yet, for all that wealth, the inhabitants themselves were like shadows. Neighbors went by very genetic alias like Tom or Jessica, never disclosing their real names nor their real past. Pray too much, And boom, conversation over. Oh, look, I'm busy with something and I have to run. In this neighborhood, wealth was on full display, but real identities were strictly off limits. For Miss A, freshly divorced and well-heeled, it was the perfect stage. She slipped right in, queen of a palace-sized house, ready to script a brand new chapter among the city's quiet but moneyed elite. For a while, life was tranquil, almost too calm for Miss A. Behind the tall hedges and shiny gates, nobody really knew their neighbors, and secrets stayed secrets. Like all high society, whispers climbed the grapevine through the maids and the housekeepers. Mostly Filipino nannies hang out in the park, swapping gossip while trading recipes. Then, one spring day in 2015, Miss A's maid came back with a little info. Back then, it felt like no big deal to her, just another tiny thing in the neighborhood. But boy, oh boy, that was about to have a huge snowball effect. The maid said to her, "So today I met this European guy at the park today. He's an architect and said he loves old houses and wants to sketch them, and he'll even pay the owner a little something." Miss A was in the kitchen making dumplings with her daughter when she heard it. She thought, not a big deal. So she said yes, and just like that, she let him in. Looking back, that's when the trap was set. The very next day, once her daughter was off at school, an Audi pulled up on the driveway. Out stepped this tall, broad-shouldered European guy, and to Miss A, he looked like Prince Harry had just strolled up to her front lawn. Seriously, are all European men built like this? She wondered to herself. "Hi, my name is Philip," he introduced himself. "I'm an architect and really love the style of these homes. I'd like to spend 2, maybe 3 days to sketch your house, if possible." Miss A didn't catch every word, but she did hear architect and heritage. Close enough. Sketching the house? Sure, why not? And just like that, she agreed. That whole day, while he measured and drew, Miss A ended up speaking more English than she did for the past year. Philip was full of energy, waving his arms around, popping open trunks of his Audi, pulling out tools while excitedly pointing at other houses nearby. That street, classic style. And this one, that's from a totally different era. This whole neighborhood is like a living museum. Miss A had zero clue what styles he was talking about. But one thing was clear. This guy was seriously into architecture and he's full of charms. The next week, Philip came back, this time not just with his measuring tools, but carrying a huge bouquet of roses. Smooth, right? Too smooth, in my opinion. 1 minute, he's sketching windows and rooftops. The next one, he's sweeping her off her feet. From there, the so-called house project turned into dinner dates, late-night chats, and weekend getaways. It all felt so natural, almost like the universe had scripted it for her. Miss A, who had been so lonely in that giant house for so long, suddenly had her own prince to rescue her away from her loneliness. And just like that, they were officially dating. Miss A's daughter warmed up to Philip almost instantly. For her, it was like finally having the dad that she never had but always dreamed of. The poor girl had always watched other kids riding bikes with their dads, packing up for camping trips, heading into the woods on weekends. Stuff her mom could never do for her, no matter how many pretty dresses she gets or fancy cafes they went to. And Philip, let me tell you, this man came prepared for the role. Gun license? Check. Fishing license? Check. Even crabbing license? You bet. Every weekend was something new and exciting. Camping, climbing, bonfires under the stars. Totally your Hallmark movie. That material. He'd chop wood, pitch the tent, and get the fire going, while Miss A just had to sit back, relax, and watch the pot that's cooking. Compared to all the brainy Chinese men that she used to date, the ones who could talk about markets and politics for hours over dinner, but couldn't fix a leaky faucet, Philip, to her, felt like a dream. Hands-on, outdoorsy, muscles in all the right places. Let's just say he sure knew how to make himself useful. But here's the catch, and there's always a catch. As perfect as Philip seemed to be on the outside, when it came to, actual conversation, it was a flop. He'd ask, "So what kind of movies do you like?" And Miss A, well, she was secretly binge-watching this Chinese sitcom called iPartment. I think Friends, but with way more over-the-top drama. No way she was gonna admit that, though she probably should have. Then he'd go, "What kind of music do you like to listen to?" And all she could manage was, popular? Which, of course, made him ask, popular like what? Which artist? At that point, she literally excused herself to go refill the teapot, just to dodge the question. I mean, dead. The conversations were absolutely dead. But you know what? Philip made up for it in other ways. One day he looked at the back of the deck and said, "Hey, this thing needs to be cleaned." Now, Miss A had been putting that off forever, but every time she asked different gardening companies, they made it sound like the work required was rocket science. "Oh, so complicated, so much extra work." And then surprise, surprise, they'd slap on some ridiculous extra fee, a total ripoff in her view. Philip didn't play that game. He just went out, rented a pressure washer, and in one afternoon, blasted years of Grimm off the deck. Just then, for fun, he scrubbed down the driveway too. Who does that? And that's when Miss A really felt it. This wasn't flowers and poems love. This was a Canadian-style love. Or at least that's what she thought. Forget sweet talk. A man who chop woods, fix up your house, and save you from being scammed? That's the kind of romance you can actually build a life on. Somewhere along the way, Philip started opening up. He told Miss A he was working at a design firm downtown, renting a little apartment nearby. And guess what? His lease was just about to expire, and he was looking for a new place to rent. Now, here's the thing. In Chinese thinking, renting doesn't make sense. It's basically like flushing money down the drain, because you're paying your landlord's mortgage instead of your own, right? So when Philip mentioned his lease was ending, Miss A couldn't help but think, Why waste money on rent when I've got a whole big mansion sitting right here? And before she even knew it, the words just slipped out. Well, my place is big. Why don't you just move in? We could try living together. Philip didn't even blink. He nodded hard. And just like that, his Audi was in her garage. He's in the boat. He's filling the role. And let's just say he made himself at home. Stepped into her second spring, Miss A. A fresh romance blooming right under her own roof. Soon enough, Miss A started showing Philip off to her social circle. And here's where Philip really knew how to play the part. One time, at a dinner party with all her girlfriends, the check came, and Miss A was instinctively reaching for it, but before she could, Philip shot her a look, snatched it up, and paid without blinking. Then, like it was nothing, he just folded the receipt and tucked it away, smooth as if he's done it 100 times. Her girlfriends glanced at each other, then back at Philip, eyes full of unspoken approval. It was like they were saying, "Lucky you, girl, here's the catch." Why? Because compared to their own partners, some of whom couldn't even buy a cup of coffee without splitting it. At least when it comes to money, Philip clearly wasn't one of those die-hard, go Dutch or die trying types. See, one of Miss A's friends had married a Caucasian man. When her father-in-law passed down the property, instead of sharing the good news, her husband dragged her to a lawyer's office and made her sign a legal document stating word for word that the house would go to his son, the inheritance was his, and she would never, under any circumstance, claim a dime. She signed. But in that moment, Miss A's friend's heart froze. I mean, come on. If that was me, I'd rather split rent with a random roommate. At least roommates don't pretend it's love. So the contrast made Philip look like a real catch. And as the Chinese saying goes, in relationships, money talks. If he's not spending it on you, he's not really invested in you. That was the belief Miss A and her friends all agreed on. With Philip, Miss A felt she had proof. From that moment, he wasn't just Miss A's Prince Harry look-alike. He was Mr. McDreamy, the guy every woman at that table secretly wished she was dating. What made Miss A fall even harder was another tiny yet significant thing. Philip's salary wasn't huge. Design firm paychecks only stretched so far. But the man was meticulous when it comes to money. From the day he moved in, he started sending Miss A e-transfers like clockwork. And not just vague lump sums. Oh no, each transfer came with a neat little memo spelling out crystal clear. $1,500 for your daughter's tuition. $500 groceries. $1,800 gutter cleaning. $2,500 new clothes for you and your daughter. Every month, $3,000 to $4,000 would quietly roll into Miss A's account. Sure, it didn't come any close to covering any real cost of that mansion lifestyle. But in her eyes, that level of devotion, that effort, that sense of responsibility, it all felt like proof he was serious about them. She told herself, If he's willing to spend most of his paycheck on us, then this man must really be in it for love. From 2015 to 2017, life was picture perfect for Miss A. The three of them, Miss A, her daughter, and Philip, played house like a real family. Weekends meant camping trips, weeknights meant family dinner at home, and for the first time in years, that gigantic mansion actually felt alive. But of course, kids grow up. And Miss A's daughter is no different. She eventually hit her rebellious phase. We're talking about slamming doors, shouting matches, dishes breaking in the kitchen. And that's when Philip stepped in. He sat the girl down and said, "Listen, she's my partner. You don't talk to her like that." He even went through her homework, circling grammar mistakes line by line like a strict dad. Miss A's daughter noticed little things too. One time, she told her mom, "You know, when you're cooking, his eyes are always on you. He looks worried you'll burn yourself on the stove. I really think he loves you." Hearing that from her own daughter only made Miss A believe it even more. Tax season had always been Miss A's nightmare. Stacks full of receipts, dividend slips from China, bank slips, statements piled in boxes. She used to dread it every single year. But with Philip around, suddenly it was no problem. He sat down, organized every scrap of paper, filled out her returns like it was nothing. When the notice of assessment came back from the government, his number matched theirs exactly. Miss A was floored. To her, this wasn't just about doing taxes. Philip was the total package, the jack of all trades who seemed to have a fix for everything. One moment he was balancing the books, the next he was patching things around the house. Back in China, Miss A never really had this kind of training. She didn't know that in the West it was common for kids to learn how to handle taxes, home repairs, all the boring but essential life admin, aka adulting. Philip said his dad had taught him everything, how to deal with the government, how to patch things up around the house, how to keep the family running. For him, this was basic survival. For Miss A, however, it was mind-blowing. Compared to many Chinese immigrants who often struggle with tax forms or relied on hired help for every little thing, Philip looked like Mr. Competent himself. With him around, Miss A didn't feel so alone in that big empty mansion anymore. Like there were extra layers of extra security, so much better than any alarm system or hired help. Miss A's girlfriends were all over the moon for her. "Girl, your Philip is so capable. You hit the jackpot. Better lock it down. Maybe consider having another baby while you're at it." They chirped away, half joking, half serious. And it wasn't just her friends. Philip's own circle of friends, just 2 or 3 close buddies, all respectable professionals, treated her like she was already his wife. They'd greet her with a polite "Mrs." Even with her limited English, that word landed in her heart like sweet, heavy honey. At one party, one of his friends showed up with a Chinese lady in a perfectly tailored chumsan. The moment their eyes met, Miss A felt instant recognition. Same taste, same class, same world. For the time being, though, life was picture perfect. Philip had transformed her world. The mother-daughter duo who once stayed home or went to classes were now out hunting, boating, living the life. They strolled under cherry blossoms, stargazed in the backyards, Philip's eyes glowing like stars, petals caught in her hair. Miss A thought, this is it. This is happiness. But then, the twist. Out of nowhere, Philip came home one day with the announcement he's lost his job. The architectural firm in downtown Vancouver had let him go. And he said he made up his mind that he was heading back to Europe. Miss A didn't take it too seriously at first. Philip's paycheck had never been much anyways in her eyes. He was worth way more. She even teased him. Honestly, you should have quit ages ago. Start your own firm. You'd crush it. But Philip just shook his head. Nope. Canada wasn't for him. His hometown, Spain, was calling. So just like that, Philip returned his leased Audi, packed up his belongings, and walked out of Miss A's life. No big dramatic fights. No long discussion. He was gone. Miss A tried to stay optimistic. She told herself it was just temporary. As soon as her daughter's summer break rolled around, she'd fly to Spain, meet Philip's family, and figure out their future together. Maybe they'd settle there once her daughter finished high school. In her mind, the love story wasn't over. It was just moving on to a new chapter. And it did. However, it was just not the kind that Miss A expected. In fact, it was the complete opposite of what she had in mind. About 2 weeks later, a stranger showed up at her door with a stack of paper in hand. He handed them over, and Miss A froze. It was a notice from Family Claim. Basically, a lawsuit. For a split second, she thought maybe her ex-husband was stirring up trouble. But no. The name on the paper was Philip's. What really threw Miss A off was the fact that this lawsuit was a family claim. Family? What do you mean family? She hadn't remarried, hadn't signed a thing, no shiny new diamond ring on her finger. She and McDreamy were just dating, boyfriend and girlfriend at most. So, what family are we even talking about here? Since when did a boyfriend suddenly qualify as family? Miss A sat there stunned, clutching the papers, but unable to make sense of them. Her daughter finally stepped in, grabbed the dictionary, and started translating, line by line, late into the night. And that's when the bomb dropped. Philip was suing her, claiming they were in a common law relationship. For those who don't know, in Canadian law, that's basically marriage if you've lived together for 2 years, which meant by moving into her house back in 2015 and staying until 2017, Philip now had the legal standing of a husband. And husbands, well, they can demand their cut. Philip wanted half of increase in her West Side mansion's value, which at Vancouver prices meant hundreds of thousands of dollars. On top of that, he was asking for spousal support, monthly payments, as if he was the one that was abandoned in a divorce. Let's put it into perspective. Back then, West Side mansions were like shooting up in values like rockets. Miss A's place was worth about $3 million, give or take. And in just those 2 years, he had jumped by around 30% in value. That's close to $1 million on paper. Philip wanted half of that. Do the math. That's about $500,000 he was coming after just in property gains. And it didn't stop there. On top of the lump sum, he also demanded spousal support, basically monthly payments to maintain his lifestyle. Lawyers told Miss A that even if the court went light on her, she could still be looking at a few $1,000s a month. For years, non-stop. In other words, Philip wasn't just knocking on her door. He was trying to move into her bank account. Miss A just couldn't wrap her head around it. Like, what was Philip even thinking? The house had been bought by her ex-husband. What did that have to do with him? How could he possibly claim a cut? In her mind, living together was dating. Breaking up, go your separate ways. Why in Canada did splitting up suddenly look like a full-on divorce trial with property divisions and support payments? Her daughter, however, was sharp. She laid it out straight. Mom, you have to answer the lawsuit. If you don't, the court could just hand him the win by default. Let's either find a lawyer or call the police. So they decided to go straight to the police. They showed the officer Philip's photo and explained the situation. The cop barely glanced at it, already annoyed. Ma'am, this is a lawsuit, a civil matter. What you need to do is respond in court, not waste your time and my time here. Panic setting. Miss A called Philip, text, emailed, anything to get through to him. Every call went straight to hang up. Finally, she got one cold reply. My lawyer is handling everything now. If you keep calling, that's harassment. I'll have no choice but to involve the police. That's why it hit her. She was on her own. She turned to the internet, desperately searching for a Chinese lawyer. Fingers trembling on the keyboard, vision blurring, the clock ticking down with every passing day. The deadline to respond was closing in and fast. Miss A stopped eating, couldn't sleep, wandered the stairs of her mansion like a ghost. She couldn't tell her friends. It was all too humiliating. She couldn't tell her family back in China. They'd only call her a fool. Miss A felt trapped and stranded on a lonely island, surrounded by endless sea called the Canadian legal system. And Philip? He didn't need to do much. With just one wave of his hand, he could send a tidal wave crashing down on her. You know what they say? Flaunting your romance might come back to bite you. But nobody thinks you'll end up like this. 2 years of love, and suddenly the man you thought was the soulmate is suing you for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So Miss A finally hired a lawyer at $380 an hour, by the way, and sat down in his office. She spent the first 2 hours doing nothing but crying, spilling out her whole story. The lawyer had hardly said a word, just sat there in silence. Like a meter running on a taxi, every tear was money down the drain. But at that point, she was too desperate to care. But when she finally calmed down to go through the details, his face told the story. The moment she mentioned that Philip had moved in spring of 2015 and left in summer of 2017, the lawyer's expression shifted. When she added that Philip had been sending regular e-transfers labeled for household expenses, the lawyer paused. And when she confessed that Philip even handled her tax returns every year. His eyebrows shot up. It was like he was silently connecting the dots, already seeing the shape of the case. And it wasn't looking good for Miss A. Finally, the lawyer leaned back and broke the silence. Here's the problem, he said. In Canada, 2 years of living together counts as common law, and common law carries almost the same weight as marriage. Miss A blinked. Wait, so you're saying we weren't just dating? That actually counts as marriage? The lawyer nodded. Legally speaking, yes. And that means anything that grew in value during those 2 years is on the table. Your house, the original purchase price is safe because it was bought before he moved in. But the appreciation while you live together, that's marital property. Same with the stock dividends. He can argue he's entitled to half. Miss A felt her chest tighten. The lawyer didn't stop there. And there's spousal support. The court can order you to pay him monthly to keep his standard of living from dropping too much. It won't be forever. You weren't together that long. But yes, it's a real possibility. Miss A sat frozen. In her head, she kept repeating the same thought. 2 years of love, and I could lose $500,000, and then have to keep paying him every month after he's gone? It felt less like a relationship now, and more like she's being catfished. After that meeting, Miss A went home and started researching online. Page after page of government websites, legal blogs, community forums, and they all said the same thing. In British Columbia, there are 2 kinds of spouses. One is the obvious, the people who sign the marriage certificates. The other, couples who live together for 2 years or more, or less if they have a child. The law calls it marriage-like relationship. And when it ends, the rules are basically the same as a divorce. Property growth gets split. Income gets split. And yes, spousal support is on the table. She couldn't believe it. To her, cohabitation had always just meant romance. Here in Canada, it was practically a legal contract she never intended to sign. When she pressed her lawyer for more hope, he didn't sugarcoat it. He admitted their firm had seen a similar case before. Another woman, another relationship, same 2-year mark. The details were sealed, but the implications was chilling. This wasn't some clueless boyfriend grasping at straws. Philip knew exactly what he was doing. He understood the law, and he set himself up perfectly to use it. The more Miss A thought about it, the less it felt like bad luck, and the more it felt like a setup. Philip wasn't just some love-struck foreigner who happened to be moving in at her house. He played the role like a pro. Every e-transfer memo, every tax form, every dinner where his friends casually called her Mrs., it all looked like less like romance and more like evidence, carefully stacked up for court. And then a chilling thought hit her. What if she wasn't the first? What if there were others before her? Women with money, assets, houses, all charmed into a 2-year relationship before getting slapped with a lawsuit. Her mind went back to that dinner party. She remembered Philip's buddy, another so-called professional, who had shown up with a Chinese woman in a fitted jumpsuit. At the time, Miss A had felt a spark of recognition, like they belonged to the same social class. But now, the memory twisted. What if that woman was just like her? Another target, another mark, another story waiting to blow up. Miss A went around consulting other lawyers, and the analyses were all the same. Philip had no asset of his own. He lived on his paycheck, and now that he was unemployed, he had nothing. His car was leased, his apartment rented, which meant the only real asset to divide were Miss A's. The mansion and her dividends. The house couldn't just walk away. The stocks couldn't just sprout legs. They were stuck and they were vulnerable. And then came the kicker, spousal support. In Canada, when a marriage or common law relationship ends, the court doesn't want one partner's lifestyle to drop too far below the other one's. So the richer one, man or woman, pays support. One lawyer told her straight, "The good news is, you weren't together that long. If the court orders spousal support, it won't be for a huge amount and it won't last forever." Miss A tried to push back. "What if I just don't pay?" The lawyer shook his head. "Don't even think about it. The government will enforce it hard." And Philip was fully prepared. He had receipts. Literally every email, transfer, memo, neatly labeled for tuition, groceries, house maintenance. To him, that was proof that this wasn't just a fling. It looked like a marriage. The lawyer told her to print out her own bank records to show context, that Philip's contributions were tiny compared to her real costs. For example, property tax on that mansion alone was nearly 20 grand a year. Then the lawyer hit her with the tough ones. When Philip filed your taxes, did he list you as common law? Do you even know what boxes he checked? Miss A felt a chill run down her spine. She had no clue. "Who even reads every single line on a tax form? I never checked." The lawyer's look said it all. Huge mistake. Then he pressed again. "Did you ever meet his family? Did he meet yours? And in public, what did people call you to?" That's when it landed like a brick. Her girlfriends always called him your guy. His buddies, they actually sent invites addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Black and White on paper. Exactly the kind of stuff that played well in court. Suddenly, every sweet moment she'd treasured felt like Exhibit A in someone else's case. She panicked, thinking, what if no lawyer even wants to touch this mess? Desperate, she turned to the media. Her last hope was that going public might push the police to step in, or at least let people see it for what she believed it was. Not a romance, but a scam dressed up as love. And that's how my colleague first heard Miss A's story. Miss A kept saying the same thing over and over. "This is fraud. How can fraud turn into a lawsuit? Is the Canadian law really this dumb? It felt like a legalized robbery." She stared straight at my colleague's eyes, desperately searching for someone to agree with her. She even handed over Philip's email address. The newsroom tried to reach out, but the email bounced. Then they sent a note to the police, hoping for some kind of reaction. 3 days later, The reply came back. A dry copy and paste boilerplate statement. We'll act at our own discretion and will not intervene in civil disputes. Translation, not our problem. After that, my colleague admitted she almost dreaded Miss A's phone calls because every time the voice on the other end was trembling, frantic. This is fraud. Why won't anyone see it? The image that stuck, Miss A walking out of the newsroom with her daughter. They were about the same height, arms linked, mother clutching to her child like a piece of driftwood in a storming water. So here's the big question. Was Philip really a scammer? Maybe in his mind it was a simple common law equals marriage breakup equals divorce, divorce equals splitting assets kind of thing. From that angle, he was just playing by the book. Maybe he was just a cold calculating guy who knew the law and used it to his best interest. But what if he was a scammer? What if this was all part of a bigger playbook? Think about it. A crew of well-dressed professionals hanging around Vancouver's west side, targeting wealthy Chinese women with property. They see one, move in with her, play house for 2 years, and quietly collects receipt the whole time. Then, when it ends, boom, lawsuit. And not just an empty one either. Imagine Philip's buddy lined up in court, polished, confident, all swearing under oath. Oh yes, we always saw them as a married couple. And in the emails where she'd addressed as Mrs., plus those neatly labeled e-transfers. That's exhibit A, B, and C right there. Now, picture Miss A's side. To fight back, she needed her own witnesses, her own evidence, her own lawyers combing through every receipt. That meant more hours, more fees, more money. In court, time is literally money. Lawyers bill by the minute, witnesses charge too, and 1 day of trial can cost around $6,000. At some point, even her own lawyers might say, look, just settle, pay him something and walk away. And here's the bigger issue. For many, love is supposed to be pure. Romance is romance, money is off the table. But Canadian law doesn't work like that. Here, living together for 2 years is basically marriage. Asset that grows in that time, up for grabs, spousal support. Also, the smart move is to sign a contract, a prenup before moving in, spelling out who pays what, who owns what, and what's off limits. Remember way back in the story, the Caucasian guy that I mentioned earlier who Mrs. A's friend actually married? Years down the line, when his father passed down the property and his inheritance, he dragged his wife right away to a lawyer to make her sign a waiver. Yes, that one. To her, it felt cold, humiliating, and completely unromantic. Like, who gets a legal waiver instead of a wedding vow? But here's the kicker. He wasn't doing it to scam her. He was just protecting what was his. Everything was clear. No surprise. No messy battles later. And that's the irony. The move that killed the romance on the surface was actually what kept the situation clean. This is what most wealthy people do. If Miss A had pushed for that, maybe none of this would have happened. And let's be real, if Philip was really running a playbook, the second she asked him to sign a prenup, he probably would have vanished and gone looking for another true love. That's the hard truth about midlife romance, or people with a lot of money. If it feels too perfect, you need to start asking why. Fairy tales do exist, but they are rare. And sometimes the sweet gestures that you think are love are just really bait. As for Miss A's story, nobody really knows what happened in the end. My colleagues searched court documents and records and came up empty. The best guess is she probably settled. And honestly, who could blame her? In BC, 95% of case ends in settlement. Courts are just too expensive and too brutal. At $6,000 a day, the legal fees alone could stack up to the same amount she'd owe Philip if she lost. Either way, it was money out the door. Fight or fold, it was a lose-lose game. And sometimes cutting a check is simple and the only way out. For all those of you in love, I hope you stay in love. But also, keep a clear head. Thank you for watching our story again. And we'll see you next time at M2 Story.